Do you recall if the balance was ever at zero at OceanGate?
This is Gordon from Solar Eclipse Timer, and my specialty is teaching people how to enjoy and photograph total solar eclipses. But I also have a great interest in researching failures of engineering and understanding entrepreneurship with ideas that are successes and ideas that are failures. I have pulled relevant testimony excerpts for you to quickly tell you the story of how OceanGate was imploding financially.
I believe the finances were just getting very tight at that time.
I believe the financial strain led to decisions that are linked to the sub imploding in 2023.
I had suggested that they not go. I was told that that wasn't possible, that they had people that paid. They had to go through with it.
OceanGate is an amazing example of a very intelligent entrepreneur, Stockton Rush, who thought he had a great idea, but terribly miscalculated the difficulties and could not stand to pull the plug and cut his losses. OceanGate was destined to fail financially anyway, but the Titan disaster ended it all. Entrepreneurs have ideas that are based on identifying a niche, an underserved or poorly served market in which they think they can do a better job, or perhaps serve the market in a revolutionary way. But entrepreneurs don't do it to break even, they do it to make money, hopefully a lot of money. Stockton Rush and his co-founder, Guillermo Solon, were the two original founders of OceanGate in 2008. They both had this idea that access to explore the deep seas was an underserved niche, controlled by a few sub-manufacturers with very few available subs that can go deep and give access to the public.
I wanted to explore, and yet I didn't understand why weren't there more vehicles down there? Why were there only 4 submersibles that could go to the average depth of the ocean?
It's a travesty for humanity that there's so few subs available to go into the deep ocean. When we started OceanGate, it was just me and Stockton and a commitment to each other that we were going to make it work. He was going to put in money, I was going to run the business. We just needed to figure out what we were going to do and how we were going to do it. At the time, we had absolutely no intention of building our own subs.
And what was the original vision for the company when OceanGate was launched?
The short answer is that our vision was to create a fleet of 4 or 5 deep diving submersibles. At the time, we were thinking they'd be 6,000 meters, capable of carrying 5 people, available for charter anywhere in the world, and with no dedicated mothership.
Why, when you have $600 billion per year of capital expenditures on ocean stuff, everything from oil platforms to pipelines to windmills to fiber optic cables, and tens of millions of billions of dollars on robots, why were there only 4 submersibles that could go to the average depth of the ocean?
To understand why OceanGate would fail financially, let me quickly explain the 2 early drivers of excess costs. First, their plan required that they get away from being linked to a mothership with a crane.
And you can imagine from these intricate machines to be made as safe and as versatile as Triton subs are, they're expensive. They're millions of dollars. And they're also generally heavy. And because they require a mothership or a support ship, that support ship usually has to have a crane big enough to take the sub in and out of the water. And it takes a lot to move that ship, in large part because it needs a lot of fuel.
So they also had to fund designing and building a launch and recovery barge based on a concept used in Hawaii that Stockton knew about. Second, they could not get an affordable 5-passenger sub built for them. It was simply too expensive, so they undertook the process of building a sub based on the carbon fiber hull concept. The research and development was incredibly expensive, and they had to build the sub twice because the first carbon fiber hull failed. You heard Guillermo state the original objective of OceanGate. It was not the plan to have a company only based on trips to the Titanic.
This might be hard to believe. When I hired on, I had no idea they planned on going to the Titanic. I was never told that. No, I wasn't told that's where we're going. I was told, hey, here's this carbon fiber idea in a submersible, and we want you to go finish it and put it together.
So right from the beginning, Building the first sub and the launch and recovery barge, investment money and cash flow was tight. They were immediately over budget. Listen to the testimony of the early director of finance.
In the shareholder process, you went into that a little bit, but can you kind of explain to us how shareholders were recruited?
Most of the shareholders, as I understood it, were friends and family of Stockton and Wendy Rush.
Explain to us how the funds were received and distributed throughout the company from the shareholders and where those funds went.
When there was a stock issuance, basically checks would just come in the mail to us. We would cash them and add them to our operating fund.
How were mission specialists specifically recruited for the company?
I know that his people were calling high wealth individuals, trying to get people on board.
And if they were paying for a future expedition, as you stated, where did the funds go? For example, did the funds get set aside in like an escrow account until the client was on board? Or did their payments fund operations and projects at the company? Can you kind of explain that process?
The funds went into our regular checking account. They were not separated out or put into a separate trust fund. The funds that came in were immediately went out to pay operations expenses.
Ms. Carl, was there a refund process if an excursion was canceled?
There was not, or at least not that I was aware of. Funds came in and immediately went back out to pay for expenses. So there was no money to refund, even if a mission specialist wanted their money back.
Were mission specialists required to sign a waiver or release a liability form?
When I was taking money from mission specialists, it was very early on. This was in 2017. So we hadn't even finished building Titan at that point.
And what was your role in that board meeting you attended?
I was an observer, and I presented the financial statement.
And what was that? You said a financial statement. Can you kind of go into that?
There wasn't a whole lot to present. It was more, we don't have a whole lot of cash, and therefore we're going to be going out with more stock to get more capital coming into the company.
Do you recall if the balance was ever at zero at OceanGate?
Never hit zero, but we got very low to the point that I was very concerned that we wouldn't even be able to make payroll the next week.
Were you always able to make payroll?
We were, because typically what would happen in one of those situations was Stockton would write a check and then we would pay it back, or he would convert it into some sort of common stock or preferred stock, or convert it into a note.
So just to clarify, Mr. Rush would provide a temporary loan to the company? Is that accurate to say?
Yes, correct.
Stockton accumulated a huge debt building even the first hull. During this time, he realized his grand dream of 4 or 5 subs stationed around the world was unattainable. He had to do a pivot to survive, and that pivot was to take advantage of the allure of the Titanic, the most well-known deep-sea object. His only chance to continue the company was to tap into the world of high-priced adventure tourism.
At the other end of this is what I call adventure tourism, but I'll elaborate on that. It's really, adventure tourism is the largest growing segment in the travel industry. It's roughly $270 billion a year. And the part of adventure tourism that is just trips that cost more than $100,000 per trip is over $4 billion a year. So there's a huge demand for travel that's different. The goal was, where do you want to go in the ocean? What is the most known site in the ocean? And it's clearly the Titanic. The story of it, the movies that have been made about it, it is so far above the next highest wreck, which I would argue is probably the Andrea Doria, that it's not even in comparison. And to go to the Titanic, which is at 3,800 meters, requires a special sub. As I mentioned, it's all about the Titanic. So we announced 2 weeks ago that we were going to go in May. The Titanic is so amazing. One of the examples of how amazing it is that there has been a number of websites that have advertised trips to the Titanic when they didn't have a sub, they didn't have a ship, they didn't have any hope or prayer of doing it. So when something is so great that people are willing to make up stories about it, that's a pretty iconic thing.
When I was taking money from mission specialists, it was very early on. This was in 2017. So we hadn't even finished building Titan at that point.
We've been holding off, even though we knew we were going there, and we brought some clients on board. We didn't want to go public until we had sold out the first year, and so we have 54 clients who are going to go for the first year, and we've started accepting folks for 2019.
You see that Stockton was advertising and selling trips to the Titanic even before he had a working sub. This would come back to bite him when the first hull failed during testing in the Bahamas. He almost killed himself and 3 others in 2019 in that first hull.
Indulge me a few minutes to lay out what I think about this, seeing that OceanGate came very, very close to killing me.
He had to cancel the 2019 expeditions, telling the mission specialists who had paid deposits that the support ship had pulled out and there wasn't a replacement ship. But he was lying. It was because the first hull failed.
There was a Titanic expedition scheduled for July of 2019.
I killed it. I wouldn't sign off on it.
Was there a hull available for the 2019 expedition?
It wasn't true. We didn't have a hull.
What's your understanding of why that expedition was canceled?
I believe it was the ship was pulled. I had come into work. They said the ship had pulled, and they had offered a substitutional ship that was not going to meet our needs.
But the partial success in the Bahamas had him chasing the carrot. He would not give up. He hoped to start making money in 2018, but didn't. Now it's 2019 and the trip is canceled. And now he will be delayed again, and he needs to fabricate a new hull and rebuild the sub. The project is a money pit. Listen to the testimony of the Director of Administration and the Director of Engineering about the financial situation during the period of time of the Titanic dive expeditions.
What were the main revenue sources that supported the OceanGate Inc.?
Investors, investment,
And how were those investors identified?
relationships that Stockton had or that he generated on his own.
Were you ever aware of a time that Mr. Rush put his own money into OceanGate Incorporated or OceanGate Expedition to fund missions or to keep employees paid?
Yes, but there was a few times where OceanGate Inc. was going to have difficulty meeting payroll, and he increased his investment by making a deposit, and we were able to meet payroll.
Were any OceanGate employees ever asked to forego their paycheck or would be willing to get paid later?
Yes. It was one time, I believe it was the beginning of 2023. We were looking to make ends meet, and if we were able to defer our paychecks, there was an offer that we could delay our paychecks and be paid a small amount of interest and recaptured at a specific time.
There were economic issues with the company asking us to forego getting paid for periods of time with the promise that they would get us caught up in paychecks, after the first of the year. It was clear that the company was economically very stressed.
Between the 2022 and 2023 expeditions, the Titan remained in Canada.
Yes.
At any point were you made aware that it was stored in the parking lot of A. Harvey?
Probably knew that because I would have to make a payment for the storage facility. That I was told around that there was no reason to bring it back at this time, that it was cost effective to leave it there, and we needed to come back and develop our mission, so we left the sub.
So it was stored on the dock in St. John's, next to where the Arctic Horizon was docked.
Did it ever move inside, or was it outside for the entire season?
We moved it inside in February of 2023.
Why OceanGate switched to towing the Titan out to sea behind the Polar Prince in 2023 is unclear. Some employees were told it was because a bigger ship was not available that year, but the Director of Engineering was told it was financial. Basically, it cost less. Towing the sub in the North Atlantic and working on the sub on this unstable platform was dangerous, not optimal, and unacceptable to the Director of Engineering. Let's listen to the testimony.
Why did OceanGate use the Horizon Arctic in 21-22 and not in 23?
Horizon Arctic was no longer available, so the Polar Prince was offered as an alternative and something that we might be able to use.
That the decision had been made to not use the Horizon Arctic, to use the Polar Prince, and to tow the sub behind the Polar Prince. This would have required us to work on the platform either while it was being towed or while we were, we were anchored or in position, and the platform bobs up and down. And I just did not see that I could do that. I did not feel right that other people who were working for me would be required to do that. I expressed that to my manager, Bob Schumann, and the reasons were, economic reasons. And I suggested that they not go, that it was just not a workable solution.
Let's talk about another huge problem with the business plan. There were no refunds to mission specialists if a dive was not successful to the Titanic. Instead, they gave a credit to come back and do another dive on a future expedition.
Were all of the expeditions successful in that all of the missions had dives that made it to the Titanic depth or met the obligation of OceanGate?
No, we did not always make it to the Titanic.
If they were unable to complete that dive during that expedition, was the mission specialist offered a refund?
No, they were offered a credit. But it was a credit, an opportunity to come back and join us on another expedition.
So if the company's money was already spent on funding the original expedition in which the dive that was obligated was not completed, where did the company get the funds to then pay for the subsequent expeditions to satisfy the customer?
New mission specialists that would come aboard, we would utilize that money to continue to fund the expedition.
Did mission specialists have to actually see the Titanic wreck site? And were they given a credit if they didn't see it, or how did that work?
The specifics, again, were handled by Stockton.
Successful dive would include actually physically seeing the Titanic.
Yes.
Think about the math. It's a 5-person sub. One person was the pilot, and a second person is the subject matter expert, like P.H. Nargeolet, who went on most of the dives. Therefore, each dive has 3 paying customers. So in 2021, they got 18 people to the Titanic, I think at $150,000 apiece, netting about $2.25 million before expenses. In 2022, they got 21 people to Titanic depth at $250,000 apiece. So in 2022, OceanGate had a total income of $5.25 million before expenses. But regarding the obligation of credits, 2 dives in 2021 did not make it to the Titanic depth. One dive in 2022 did not make it to depth, and another got to the bottom and couldn't find the wreck. So this is at least 4 dives where mission specialists, 12 people, got a credit to be moved to a subsequent dive, making those subsequent dives that are not generating new income. Carl Stanley testified that by 2023, $100 million had been sunk into OceanGate.
Guillermo gave me a number of $100 million of investment. How do you tell people their $100 million is gone and your business plan was a terrible idea and isn't working out?
There is testimony revealing that they felt financial pressure to carry out the 2023 expedition, towing the sub, no matter what the risks to the sub, the crew, or the clients. Here are the statements.
So did you witness a feeling of desperation to complete the dives to meet the compounding demands of the previous year's obligations?
Not a desperation. There definitely was an urgency to deliver on what we had offered and a dedication and perseverance towards that goal.
I had suggested that they not go. I was told that that wasn't possible, that they had people that paid. They had to go through with it.
The most amazing testimony that reveals the financial pressure OceanGate was under was given by Antonello Wilby, who discusses a dive in 2022. I believe it was dive 79, although it's not explicitly stated. Miss Wilby was a contractor with expertise in subsea navigation. She was in mission control navigating with Wendy Rush and Phil Brooks in 2022 when they had severe communication and navigation issues with the sub. They were struggling to navigate the sub to the wreck. Listen to what Wendy Rush and Phil Brooks were worried about. It was figuring out how not to give clients a repeat dive in the future for free.
During that dive, it seemed pretty clear
there were multiple breakdowns. I was trying to, analyze every aspect of this navigation system, think about the sources of error, and like figure out what had gone wrong to try to just figure out where the sub was. I mean, there were 5 people at the bottom, and it seemed like something in the operational system had broken down, and it wasn't like the sub was entirely lost. We still had USBL pings, and we knew vaguely where they were, but I couldn't with confidence try to navigate them to any landmark because it seemed like they weren't on the map where I thought they should be. During this, I recall Wendy Rush was in the communication seat and Phil Brooks was also in mission control. And they started talking about how, well, we have the map and we have the USBL, plots. We can show them they got close to the Titanic. So if anyone's upset and wants a refund, we can show them, we delivered our part of the service. You got close enough. And I was frankly pretty angry at this because we still had the problem at hand. We didn't know why the navigation seemed to be off. And then they were talking about profit.
Here are 2 other business mistakes that Stockton made. First, the plan to go to the Titanic required that he lease big ships. He needed to lease the Horizon Arctic and then the Polar Prince for weeks at a time. Remember, the initial basis for his business model was not to be linked to big ships. He was doing just the opposite now. His second big mistake was the fact that the Titanic expeditions had a limited seasonal window of opportunity.
Every area, people, the locals and everyone knows sort of what are the good seasons. So for the Titanic, the good season is May through August, historically.
If you are going to have a business that requires something like a multi-million-dollar cost of a sub, you have to be able to operate year-round. In summary, this is a detailed analysis of the financial implosion of OceanGate based on testimony under oath from people with first-hand experience. It's an amazing example of an entrepreneurial dream gone wrong. There are lessons to be learned from this if you have big ideas. It's hard to give Stockton any compliments when I analyze what he did, but it's amazing that he built a homemade sub that reached the Titanic 13 times. I just wish he had backed off after the initial success when he knew it was not financially viable, as he said himself in 2017.
Our goal is to go to the Titanic every year until it doesn't make financial sense.